The failure of Resident Evil 2 is often regarded as one of gaming's biggest disasters. A game that should have helped create a franchise that would span decades was instead the harbinger of its demise. After terrible reception and the game not even coming close to Capcom's projections, its producer, Shinji Mikami, famously declared that Capcom will be producing no further survival horror titles. What most people aren't aware of are the victims of Resident Evil 2. All of the games across the industry that were cancelled as publishers cut their losses, fearing their horror projects would meet a similar fate. One of these games never saw the light of day, both literally and figuratively. It was a game that took place in a world of fog. For years, little was known about 1998's Silent Hill, Konami's cancelled horror game. After the game's cancellation 2/3 of the way through its development, its team was moved on to other projects, and the world forgot it ever existed. That was until concept and production art from the game surfaced a few months ago. Today, using developer interviews, footage from demos, and this newly discovered concept art, we are going to be piecing together a game that never was. This is Lost, a Silent Hill retrospective. The story of Silent Hill, its troubled development, and untimely cancellation strangely begins in an arcade machine. 1983's Hyper Olympic was a massive success for Konami. Though releasing originally for arcades, it was ported to the Atari 2600, the Apple II, and eventually the Famicom and the NES. By the time the Hyper Olympic well had run dry, it was 1995, and Konami decided that to further capitalize on the series' success, they would remake it in 3D for Sony's new home console, the PlayStation. The remake would be called Hyper Olympic in Atlanta. This is where we meet up-and-coming game developer Keiichiro Toyama. At the time, Toyama was a graphic designer at Konami, having just finished working on the Sega CD port of Snatcher. After Snatcher, Toyama was assigned to Hyper Olympic in Atlanta, this time taking on a few more development responsibilities. Toyama's work impressed his seniors, and once the game shipped in 1996, Konami's upper management began considering him for more involved roles in upcoming games. Earlier in that same year, the industry was shaken by the release of Capcom's Biohazard, or Resident Evil. The game's massive success naturally caught the eye of many publishers who were interested in creating their own survival horror games. Konami wanted in on the action, and a meeting among producers was called to begin assembling staff for their new survival horror title. After his great work on Hyper Olympic in Atlanta, Keiichiro Toyama was proposed as the game's director. But this wasn't the only game his name was floated around for. Konami was already working on a sequel to the Hyper Olympic remake, and Toyama's name was brought up there as well. Toyama was given a choice. He could either direct Hyper Olympic in Nagano or Silent Hill. Though the choice between these two may seem obvious, in an interview many years later, Toyama said that he would come to regret accepting the role of director on Silent Hill. He claims he was not ready for it, and his directorial inexperience held back the other members of the team, something which he believed factored into the game's cancellation. Only a few of the other team members of Silent Hill are publicly known. From a January 1998 Edge magazine interview, we know that the game's producer was Gozo Kitao. Its sound designer was Akira Yamaoka, and its CG designer was Takayoshi Sato. Unfortunately, unless they come forward in the future, anyone else who worked on Silent Hill is unknown, as footage from the game's E3 demo does not show other staff that worked on it. By September of 1996, Konami had assembled a team, but upper management was unsure about the game they wanted them to create. This was the first of many issues that Toyama recalled the project facing. Konami's higher-ups knew they wanted a game like Resident Evil, but that was the only real direction communicated to the staff. As a result, Toyama and the team struggled to create working concepts that Konami would approve. Toyama's original vision was a horror game set in Japan, but this idea was rejected because Konami wanted the game to appeal to the Western market. Since the team had worked on games that were primarily successful in Japan, they weren't sure about how to proceed with such a mandate. This was the source of many headaches, as they often lacked the proper reference to emulate Western titles, and Toyama said that they had to heavily rely on American pop culture. Even still, Konami was not satisfied with their ideas, telling the team that the game should feel like a Hollywood film. Eventually, after numerous rejections, Kitao and Toyama convinced everyone else to begin ignoring the restrictions set by Konami. It was clear they didn't know what they wanted, and the team already felt ostracized at the company because their project wasn't moving forward. With each meeting, Konami seniors were less enthusiastic about the game, and thus more willing to accept any form of progress, even if they didn't entirely approve of it. According to Toyama, this decision served as the game's first moment of clarity and cohesion. The team rallied around the idea that Silent Hill would be a psychological horror experience set in a Midwestern American town. This brings us to the first of the concept art found last year. We know from interviews that Silent Hill was about a father who lost his daughter in a strange town. Until a few months ago, we only knew what these characters looked like based on the game's intro. But now, we have actual art. Meet Harry Mason, one of the game's main characters. From his stature alone, you can feel the 80s action hero influence. Harry was just one of Silent Hill's playable characters. Toyama wrote the game's scenarios and has said that it was meant to have two protagonists, the second being a police officer you met at the start of the game. Say hello to Sybil Bennett. Toyama's idea was that you'd first play the game from Harry's perspective, and once you finished it as Harry, you unlocked Sybil's perspective. Toyama has also stated that the game was meant to have as many as 14 different endings, something that didn't help its development in the slightest. By 1997, Silent Hill was in full production, and that's when the team began understanding the technical ramifications of the game they wanted to create. For example, they wanted to make a setting you could freely explore, but the PlayStation 1's single megabyte of VRAM made this very difficult. There simply wasn't enough memory to render the world at a distance without heavy polygon clipping. While it's difficult to say what their exact solution was, based on the game's demo, it appears they solved this using a technique known as distance fog, where objects at a distance are rendered with different shading. Another major issue came in the form of the game's cinematics. Japanese game development is very centered around seniority. Juniors or younger game developers used to be treated quite harshly, to the point where they'd go uncredited on projects if higher-ups in the company didn't see their work as meaningful. This was happening to Takayoshi Sato, who was a rookie at the time working on Silent Hill's UI elements. Sato's real passion, however, was 3D, and because he was sick of not getting any credit for his work, he put together a 4-second 3D cinematic for the game. He went above Gozo Kitao and presented this short directly to Konami management, and then threatened to never show anyone how it was done unless he was given more substantial roles on the game. Konami higher-ups begrudgingly gave him more responsibilities, but his actual title still did not reflect the amount of work he was doing, so Sato offered to do even more. The 1998 Edge magazine interview about Silent Hill refers to Sato as CG supervisor, but he claims he did literally everything concerning the game's cinematics, from modeling, rigging, lighting, and even the designs of the characters. Though we'll never see the full extent of Sato's work on Silent Hill, one can easily tell just from the introduction cinematic that Silent Hill's cutscenes would have been groundbreaking for the time. Thanks to this intro, we also have a better glimpse of characters that do not appear in the game's demo. We can see a young woman, a nurse, a middle-aged man, and an older woman who appears to be a witch of some sort. There is one final unnamed character, a girl in a school uniform. She's the only unnamed character from this intro who can also be seen in the leaked concept art. She appears at the beginning of the intro and at the end as Harry swerves away from hitting her with his car. She doesn't appear to be much older than Harry's daughter, Cheryl, who is also among the characters depicted in the new concept art, though her design seems to have changed a bit in the final game. Plot details about Silent Hill are very sparse. Neither Toyama nor any of the other developers who worked on Silent Hill have ever spoken at length about the game's story, and all interviews prior to the game's cancellation only describe what journalists played of the game's 1998 demo. Harry and Cheryl Mason were in a car accident, after which Harry wakes up alone in a town called Silent Hill. Harry begins looking for Cheryl, but instead finds something horrific and is attacked, then blacks out. When he wakes up again, he's in a diner with Sybil Bennett. This is where part 1 of the demo ends. Part 2 starts in a school named Midwich Elementary. In Part 2, we see more in-depth gameplay, like the game's combat. Silent Hill had guns and even melee weapons. Until concept art of the game came to light, we didn't know what Silent Hill's enemies really looked like, and for the most part, we still don't. However, in the school, Harry encounters these apparitions, and I believe this concept art is of the same enemy. They don't attack Harry, and given that he's in a school, it's likely that these are the spirits of children. Midwich Elementary is also where we can see the most unique aspect of Silent Hill. After solving a puzzle with a piano, Harry ends up in a different version of the school. It's much darker and disturbing, almost like it's another world entirely. In the courtyard of this version of the school, Harry finds an occult symbol. Until a few months ago, this and scenes from the intro with the old woman were the only real clues as to what was going on in Silent Hill. Supernatural involvement has always been the most popular theory on the internet, and this was all but confirmed through the new concept art. This monster is not mentioned in any interview about the game, and they're not in the game's demo either. But it's clear that Silent Hill definitely had some sort of cult in it, and they were likely the cause of what's going on in the town. This is the most polished concept art of the game ever released, likely because the game was so far into development before its cancellation. Going into 1998, the Silent Hill team was in good spirits. They had made substantial progress on the game, and despite their initial reluctance, Konami management was supportive of the title. Toyama described this pocket of time as the most peaceful in its development, but also as the calm before the storm, because on January 21st, everything would change. In the Japanese games industry, news actually travels quite far. The community is much more tight-knit than here in the States, and this leads to a lot of poorly kept secrets. In 1997, there was a widely discussed rumor in Japan that one of Capcom's new games was not doing well. We would later find out that this was in reference to Shinji Mikami and Hideki Kamiya's constant fights over the direction of Resident Evil 2. In a 2007 interview, Shinji Mikami stated that, at the time, he thought about backing off from the project and letting Hideki Kamiya take the reins, but because he was so attached to the first game, Mikami couldn't let it go. And on January 21st, 1998, the world was exposed to the infamous Resident Evil 2, a very boring and frustrating sequel that was the result of two different design ideologies playing tug of war. The game reviewed poorly and then sold terribly due to bad word of mouth. For Capcom, this meant that they would not make any more games like this, as the market evaporated overnight. For Konami, this was the first nail in the coffin for Silent Hill. Toyama said that the mood around the office changed once Konami got wind of Resident Evil 2's sales. Silent Hill was commissioned because Konami wanted a game that would generate revenue comparable to Resident Evil, but Capcom's sequel bombed and they lost nearly $5 million. While Silent Hill had a fairly small budget, Konami management knew that they'd have to spend around twice its budget to market it properly. Konami called another producer meeting to discuss the game's future. Some in management wanted to cancel Silent Hill then and there, but others fought for Toyama and the team. Konami higher-ups decided that it would be too rash to cancel the game at that point, as they were pleased with the game's progress in the last year. However, they would devote no additional funds to the game unless public reception at the upcoming Electronic Entertainment Expo was positive. For Toyama and the team, this was bittersweet. They worked so hard to sell Konami on their vision of survival horror, only for most of that effort to come crashing down in less than a month. Toyama described this moment as the true death of the game. Though Silent Hill would ultimately be cancelled months later, he said his inexperience as a director made him blind to the declining morale of the team. Instead of banding everyone together to get a demo ready for E3, Toyama neglected the team and left them to work in isolation. With little communication between the game's disciplines, each ran into their own issues that slowed progress significantly. Takayoshi Sato stated that he lacked the necessary equipment to efficiently render cutscenes. His requests for more powerful hardware were ignored, as Toyama believed that Konami would reject them because they were too expensive. As a result, a single frame of Sato's cinematic work would take 3 to 4 hours to render, and he considered it a miracle that the introduction cinematic was completed at all. Similarly, the game had a bug where the longer you played it, the more corrupt the audio would get until you couldn't hear anything. Sound director Akira Yamaoka remarked in 2010 that this was because of a programming error that could have been fixed, but wasn't, because everyone on the team thought they could make the demo short enough to where this issue wouldn't happen to anyone playing. They were wrong and quickly realized this in May of 1998 at E3. Resident Evil 2 left such a bad taste in people's mouths that just mentioning the phrase survival horror was met with disapproval. This already hurt Silent Hill, as many gamers were not even willing to try the demo. Those that did gave it mixed reviews, saying that while it succeeded in creating a horror atmosphere, the game's technical issues were too large to ignore. Among them, the aforementioned audio bug. The game's controls and melee combat were also criticized. Some even complained that the puzzles were too difficult, and many got stuck on the second part of the demo on the piano puzzle and gave up. The few reports that came out of E3 about Silent Hill were simply not complimentary. Konami management expected substantial critique of the game. They knew it had issues, but believed they could be ironed out before release. What caught them by surprise was the overall lack of interest in the game. They didn't cancel Silent Hill earlier in the year because they believed Resident Evil 2's failure was an isolated incident. It was looking more and more as if that wasn't the case, and Capcom's call to not make any more survival horror games was the right decision. After E3, one final meeting was called by Konami management. Toyama and the Silent Hill team had less allies this time around, given the game's stagnant progress and less than ideal showing at the convention. With all signs pointing to further investment in the game being a lost cause, Silent Hill was cancelled in June of 1998. Toyama was actually relieved when he heard the news. Everyone on the team expected it given how unenthusiastic they were about the demo they themselves created. Though no build of the game has ever leaked, Toyama has said that it was about 80% complete before it was cancelled. Despite the team believing in the game and the work they'd done on it, everyone understood the reality of the situation. According to Sato, there were no hard feelings among the team, as nearly everyone on the project made mistakes, and it was largely doomed because of factors outside of their control. After the game's cancellation, some team members left Konami, while others were assigned to other projects. Konami later informed news outlets that the game had been cancelled, and that was the end of Silent Hill. Or was it? In 1999, Toyama left Konami for a job at SIE, Sony Interactive Entertainment. Toyama felt that his inexperience contributed to Silent Hill's cancellation, and that he needed to rebuild those skills at another company. He believed that a game like Silent Hill could work, and one of the first things he did at SIE was try to talk them into making a horror game. It would be set in Japan as he always intended, but SIE wasn't very receptive to the idea, and didn't greenlight the game. Though Toyama left Konami, he remained in contact with his former colleagues, and has said that, over the years, the remaining developers who worked on Silent Hill continued pitching horror games to Konami. This would explain the rest of the concept art leaked last year. No details are known about the following characters, nor their role in whatever scrapped games they were a part of. The first is of a woman, who appears seductive in nature. The second is of a man, and a monster. This page has been torn in half, though I doubt we'll ever know why. The third and final image is the most distinct. Unlike the others, it doesn't appear to have been drawn by the same artist. It is simply a few headshots of a young woman. Something tells me that a lot more than one game died with the cancellation of Silent Hill, and that the industry as a whole lost something very special in 1998 when the survival horror experiment came to an end. We'll never know what the genre could have transformed into, or the games that could have been if things had turned out different. I'd like to think that, somewhere out there, that universe exists. Thanks for watching.